And so that is our superpower. That love and that parent's instinct is so important, and our children need that. Hi, you're listening to The Rare Life. I'm your host, Madeline Cheney, and I have a solo episode for you today. I'm going to talk about a really important fact for us to really come to terms with, which is you are exactly what your child needs. I'll say it one more time. You are exactly what your child needs. But first, it is time to collect takeaways from season 2. For this season, I'm collecting those a little bit differently than from season 1. You get to send in audio clips. It's super easy. There's a link in the show notes, and you just head to that website. Then you can record your takeaway, and you can even redo it if you don't like how it turned out before you submit it. That can be any takeaway from season 2, like a favorite episode or anything you've learned or liked. I will use a few of those for season 2's finale episode. We have one more week to submit though, so please get those in to me. It is also time for a new question of the month now that we are into January. The new question is, what is your favorite form of self-care? What fills you up? What lights your fire? Please answer that on the website, therarelifepodcast.com. You can also check out the answers from December's question of the month, which was, what is the most valuable quality you've gained because of your child? Which is a really cool one, I think. All right, so the takeaway from today's episode is you are exactly what your child needs. I am exactly what Kimball needs because of our love for them. Our love is our superpower, but it is also our kryptonite. So let's start out with the truth that you are exactly what your child needs. I think it's an interesting moment to become a special needs parent or a parent of a medically complex child because the learning curve is huge. There are the medical terms, the medical needs, medical appointments, therapy appointments, the unanswered questions, the unanswerable questions, the hospital stays, the stairs, the new diagnoses, and the watching them suffer and struggle. Which means that we have a lot to learn at first, but it also really made me feel like I was not enough. And I still really struggle with that. Not as much as the beginning because I've learned so much and now I kind of feel like I know what I'm doing more. But especially at the beginning, I didn't feel like enough. And I felt small compared to his huge mountain of needs and incapable. It was simply totally different than anything I had experienced. I was thrown into this huge new world that my parents hadn't been through, my in-laws haven't been through, none of my close friends had been through. And so the learning curve was huge and painful. And I think that's probably the case for most of us, that we're totally and utterly unprepared for all the medical needs and extra needs that our children have. But we have a secret weapon that makes us enough, and that is love for our children. We have a lot of roles as parents. We are their therapists, their nurses, their cooks, chauffeur to appointments, and secretary for scheduling appointments. I remember spending an entire precious nap time of an hour and a half just scheduling follow-up appointments for Kimball when he first came home from the NICU. And I was like, man, is this my life, being on hold and scheduling appointments? And it is my life, but I've gotten used to it. So we have a lot of really important roles. Those are all very important for our children. But the greatest role that we have is being a loving parent. And there's a great episode by a developmental specialist, Lisa, in season 1. It's episode 4, one of the very first ones. And it is so fantastic. It's called You Are Not Your Child's Therapist. And she speaks about that, about being their parent first and foremost and not feeling that pressure of all the therapies. Because it's easy to feel the pressure of therapies or the medical appointments and to feel like that's our most important role. But it isn't. Is to be a loving parent. And once we focus on being a loving parent, then that can help us with all the other needs. But I think it's also important to know that being a loving parent and trying is enough. That is what makes us enough, is because we try and because we love them. So I have a story that is very near and dear to my heart. Kimball has a very dangerous cervical spine malformation, and it is typical with his diagnosis of chondrodysplasia punctata X-linked type 1, a type of skeletal dysplasia. And as we heard recently from Jenny McLeland, another mom of a child with the same syndrome in episode 23, that is a lethal and hugely catastrophic issue to have, because your cervical spine is in charge of protecting your spinal cord from compression. And I've talked about this in previous episodes too, but I'm going to go more into it. So as a reminder too, if his spine comes into flexion, which just means his chin to his chest, in a jerky movement, then he's in danger of spinal cord compression, which can lead to paralysis or death. And it has killed children with this before. So that is this huge looming diagnosis that we have with Kimball, and by far the scariest. So in the NICU, we found out about his unstable cervical spine that was confirmed. We knew that was a risk with his syndrome. And so he had a cervical collar made for him, as I talked about in the NICU episode recently. And that was this huge plastic contraption that went all the way down to his belly button and halfway down his back. Had two pieces we had to clamp together. And in the hospital, when they taught us, we had to use 3 people to put it on him for when we wanted to hold him or move him to keep his spine safe. And that was terrible, as we went home with that cervical collar. I eventually learned how to do it on my own so that I wouldn't always need Justin there to put it on with me. And it was really hard to have a newborn needing to be held and, fussy and up all night, those kinds of things, but not being able to hold him until we put on this contraption that he hated. It was super uncomfortable and he couldn't move. And so, of course, when we put that on him, he'd be screaming. And then once we were done holding him, we could take it off. But every time we put it on or took it off, that really upset him. So that was really tricky for when he would be crying in the night and I wanted to pick him up and comfort him, but I knew I'd have to put this huge contraption on. So he did a little more crying it out than Wendy had to do as a newborn, because we knew that would just make him more upset. So that was a really hard part of the first 3 months of his life. Then we went to a follow-up with neurosurgery, and they're the ones who are in charge of following up with his cervical spine. And he was 3 months old when we went in for that. It was a 3-month checkup. And Kimball's main neurosurgeon was not there at that time. So we had another neurosurgeon look at it. So we went and had his x-rays. We always go down to radiology first, and they x-ray him with his neck in various positions to see what his spinal cord and cervical spine is doing in each position, to kind of check it out and make sure no damage has happened. So we went up to that other doctor, the other neurosurgeon, and he swept into the room and he walked over super dramatically and took off Kimball's collar. And he was like, he doesn't need it anymore. And we were like, what? It was so surprising. We knew there was like this sliver of a chance that his cervical spine would harden on its own, because the vertebrae in there are just not hard and they're soft. He just told us that his cervical spine was fine. So we were so shocked and so excited. And so we walked out of there so happy. There were a lot of really powerful emotions attached to his cervical spine stability, because it has lifelong implications and it's a scary one. And so finding out all of a sudden that he was healed and he was fine, it was hard to explain how freeing it felt. And we got to hold him. We got to hold him close. I remember just squeezing him towards myself as we walked out of the hospital. I remember telling Justin, I feel happier now than I did when he was born. I feel so happy. And I felt like I could finally hold him without anything in the way. It just felt like I was finally holding him. And so we went home and we're just so excited about having that darn thing out of our lives. I think Justin hated the cervical collar even more than I did. So we went along with our lives, and then 6 months later, we had another follow-up with neurosurgery. This time, I just went with Kimball. And we went and had the x-rays, and then we went up, and this time, Kimball's actual neurosurgeon was there. And he came in and told me, Kimball's cervical spine is not stable. It's super dangerous, and he needs to wear a collar. And I never dreamed of that happening, of him having to go back to that. And I was crushed. I was so crushed. Because again, it's not just the collar that he has to wear. It also means that he is in this huge danger of dying from it. He could eventually die from this if an accident happens. And he showed me the x-rays and how close it was coming to compressing his spinal cord when he was in flexion. And he said he has to go back to wearing a collar. And I fought it. I was like, is there any other option? Can he at least sleep without it? Because I couldn't imagine him trying to sleep in it. And he was like, no, he needs to wear it all the time. I was like, well, can I like hold him once in a while without it? And he was like, well, maybe if you're super careful during that. And we kind of went back and forth. I kept just like, could we do this? Or is there any way he could not have to wear it during this time? And he was like, he could die from this. He has to wear this all the time. He said, it's not worth the risk. And he said, when he's 4 years old, we'll look at fusing his spine, which would be just hardening the vertebrae artificially. And then he wouldn't have to be in the collar. And I was looking at my 9-month-old baby thinking, 4 years old, that felt like a lifetime away that he'll have to wear this collar. So I finally said, okay. And he gave me the number for the same guy who made the custom-made collar before to make a bigger size for him. And I left the office just numb with grief. I felt so upset. And so we went home, and it was Valentine's Day. So when we pulled into the garage, I noticed a bunch of these little paper hearts that Justin and Wendy had made for me. And it said like world's best mom and cute little things like that. And I was just crying. I was like, oh, I feel so upset. And I feel so grateful to see those little paper hearts saying world's best mom. I just needed something like that. I was just in such a dark place. And so I got Kimball out of his car seat, and we went inside, and Justin immediately knew that something was very wrong. He said, what happened? So I told him that Kimball had to go back to his collar and that his spine wasn't okay. And we just held each other, and I just cried. And that was, hopefully will remain the worst Valentine's Day of our lives, but it was awful. So I just was grappling with this issue. I was like, I do not want to put him back in that collar. I knew it would make him very unhappy. And there are certain things I am totally good with doing that make children unhappy, like sleep training, because I know it's best for them and that they'll eventually be able to sleep really well or things like that. But this collar was just one more thing to add back in. And we had such terrible memories of it. I knew Kimball would hate it. So after poking through social media, I found a friend that has a son with the same syndrome, and he had this collar that looked a little more cushy. And I was like, okay, that looks like a little better. So she told me what it was called, and I looked it up, and I called Kimball's doctor, Dr. B, and asked him if this type of collar would be okay. And he said, yes, that'd be fine. So I called several different medical suppliers, and no one had an infant size because this is just so rare for infants to have cervical spine issues. So finally, I just ordered the smallest size possible. I think it was on Amazon even, of this type of collar, and we tried it on him, and it was huge. It didn't do anything. It just made him scream. It didn't protect his spine, and it was really uncomfortable for him. He couldn't reach his fingers to suck on like he was used to, and it was just really sad. So I stopped putting him in that, and I felt so defeated and so upset. I was like, I morally feel so against him wearing this collar, but I don't want him to die from this. And I'm religious. And so I was praying. And usually I would just pray for comfort, like, just help me to feel at peace with this. But I was like, no, help me to find an alternative. Because I just couldn't figure out any way around it. It's like, I don't think there's any way around this. I think he just has to wear that collar, but I do not want him to have to wear that. And so I asked for a solution, a way around it. I said, how can I make this not be how it is? How can I change this? What can I do about this? And I'll never forget. It was so cool. I mean, like, I'm not trying to shove religion, but some kind of meditation, I think it's within us. But I had this image in my head of a tiny boppy pillow, those nursing pillows, all soft and cushy. And I was like, okay, like, I guess I'll try to sew that, because that just popped into my head. So the next morning I got out my sewing machine, and that was my form of self-care, as I would sew. It was really challenging, but it was rewarding to me. So I got out my sewing machine, and I think I just drew a circle on the fabric and I cut it, and I was just guessing. Kimball was napping at the time. I didn't measure anything. And I sewed that, and I saw that we had a memory foam pillow that was extra, and the memory foam in it was all like chopped up in little pieces. So I used that, and I stuffed it with that to make a little pillow for his neck. And if you can just imagine, it's just like a little boppy pillow is what it looks like. And so I made that, and I think I used like a ribbon to tie it in the back. And then Kimball woke up, and I tried it on him, and it fit him. Looking back at the collar, I saved it because it is so precious to me. Looking back at it, it's atrocious. And I'm surprised that I ever thought that it fit him, because it really was too big and things like that. But I had a glimmer of hope. Like, wow, maybe this will work, because it kept his chin from going down onto his chest. But I kept tweaking it. And I have, to this day, I have more than a dozen different versions of it trying to perfect that collar. But it was a couple months after that, I finally plucked up the courage to schedule an appointment to have his neurosurgeon approve it. I had been putting that on him. I felt like it was probably okay, but I had this fear in my heart that, he's not going to approve it. He's going to like slap me upside the head and say, why is he not wearing that other collar? This was my moment of rebellion, I guess. And so we went in for that appointment, and I felt nauseous. I was so scared that he would tell me that he had to be put back into that plastic collar. And the thing is, too, that was the only position he couldn't go in, into flexion. Cervical collars are traditionally made so that you can't move at all. You can't move your head at all. It's to protect against all positions, but it's only in flexion that he's in danger. So that was another thing that made it easier, is I just had to make a little cushion to go between his chin and his chest. And it was cushy but firm, and his fabric, it was just so much more comfortable. He didn't complain at all while he was wearing it. He had full movement, and I loved it, and I did not want him to say that he couldn't wear it anymore. So we got to the appointment, and I asked him, I was like, is this okay? I made this. And he was like, that is amazing. That is so cool. He can totally wear that. And I was so excited. I was so thrilled. I felt so BA. I felt amazing. I was like, I made that. And he just went on and on about how awesome it was. And he was like, you should sell those, which later I looked into. I was like, that would be cool to help other parents. But apparently this is a really rare birth defect. So there's not a huge market, but I would love to give them to whoever could use them, because it changed his life, and it changed our life, because he could move and he was happy in it, and it was comfortable. I vividly remember walking out of there and into the parking garage and just calling Justin and calling my mom and just saying, he approved it. And not only did he approve it, but he praised it. And he is one of the top pediatric neurosurgeons in the country. I've had friends who've traveled from across the country to have a visit with him because he is so renowned. So that is one of my proudest moments of my life. I was so thrilled. And so Kimball got to wear that much more comfortable collar. And I've thought about that moment, and I think it's an awesome example of our superpower of love for our children. And I'm sure that there are many other stories that are similar where we have ideas that the doctors didn't think of. We think of questions that they didn't think of because we love our children. And it's not because the doctors or the therapists are less than or they don't care for our children, but they can't care for them in the same way that we do. And in that first appointment, as his neurosurgeon was adamantly telling me he had to wear it to keep him safe, I also wanted him to be safe, and more so than him, but I also was thinking about his well-being and his happiness and his development and his quality of life. So I went to work trying to figure out how to solve it because I love him. And so that is our superpower. That love and that parent's instinct is so important, and our children need that. And love is what gives us the motivation to do things that seem impossible. To me, the seemingly impossible was to figure out how he could be safe but not have to wear that terrible collar. But sometimes the seemingly impossible is getting in the car and taking our child to that appointment, or getting out of bed when we're totally overwhelmed. It's the love that can give us motivation just to move on and carry on. It doesn't have to be these like grand, exciting stories. And that reminds me a lot of Anna Stanfield's special topic episode in episode 28 about grief. And in that conclusion of that episode, she said that her love for her children and her family is what carries her through the pain of her grief. And I think that is such a powerful truth, that love for our children can help us to carry on, whatever that looks like for us in each situation that we're in. Which leads me to the kryptonite of love. In her episode, we talk about how we grieve because we love our children. They bring us grief because we love them. And so love is a double-edged sword. It can be very painful. It's because we love them that it hurts to see them suffer. It's because of that fierce love that we feel pain with them when they're struggling to breathe, or when they're being bullied, or have yet another surgery, or are hospitalized again. We suffer with them, and probably even worse than they are suffering. It is so hard to watch our children suffer because we love them. So that love really is this wonderful and awful thing because it's so painful. And I had a moment in therapy with my therapist, Rosie. She was asking me how I felt when I had to shove these nose stents into Kimball's nose to help open it up so he could breathe easier. Kimball hated those nose stents. Those were terrible. And sometimes they would make him bleed. They were super long. They were like 1.5 inches. And he would just scream and writhe, and we'd have to hold him down and shove those in there. And then it made it harder for him to breathe, really, because there was something in there. We were just trying to open it up permanently. And she asked me, how do you feel during that? And I said, I just try not to think about it. I just think about something else and just do it and go in robot mode. And I do that when I hear him struggling to breathe, because if I think about it too much, I feel myself struggling to breathe. And I start panicking because I imagine, what would it be like? Kind of like when you're congested and have a cold. What would it feel like to be like that constantly? And then I go in a panic, and I hate thinking about that. It's so painful to think about. But she encouraged me to feel the pain with him, to allow myself to have all of those emotions instead of pushing them aside, and to work through that pain and that grief. And so I've tried to do that. It is hard. It is so hard. It's hard to allow myself to empathize with Kimball and to feel all the emotions that come with watching him struggle and suffer. But also, as Anna says in her episode, when we shield ourselves from that pain, we're also shielding ourselves from that love, and we can't fully experience all the love if we're shielding ourselves from the pain. And that love is pain. We feel pain because we love them. And so I've tried to become less guarded. It's hard, but I'm working on it. And I do feel like I'm more open to the love for Kimball. I allow myself to feel it more and to work through that pain. But again, that love is also our superpower, and it is exactly what our children need from us. They need our love. You are enough. I am enough. Our love for our children is enough. You can follow me on Instagram to see my cute kiddos and to learn about episodes being released at the_rare_life. Join me next week for episode 31, the story of Ryan, a delightful teenager with Prader-Willi syndrome. See you then.